So we're going to start with kind of a big picture. Like, why are you in this class? Why are we talking about this? Why do we care about our health? And the mindset I want you to have throughout this course is that your behaviors and your actions don't just affect you right now as a college student, but they also affect you many, many, many years down the road. That's not the mindset that we often have, but I think we need to start to have that mindset. So let's just look at some examples. So short term and long term. How about something like lack of sleep? I would have all of you raise your hand if you get enough sleep, and I'm guessing the vast majority of you in class would not raise your hand because most of you don't sleep enough. But lack of sleep. So in the short term, we know that we're maybe a little bit more grouchy and we're just tired and we don't have the energy to do what we need to do. Well, the interesting thing is the research shows that lack of sleep can also be tied to things like obesity and other chronic diseases. So short-term view and long-term view. Okay, how about something like stress? How many of you are stressed? You're probably all a little bit more stressed right now because we're going through a lot of change and we're trying to figure out how to finish out this semester. Like, stress is a pretty common feeling in college. We know in the short term that makes us feel anxious and worried and overwhelmed, but did you know that in the long term, it's actually pretty closely linked to cardiovascular disease? The higher your stress, the more chronic or cardiovascular disease we might see. So we've got to think about the short-term implications of our behaviors. We also have to think about the long term. So life expectancy. This is something that, we use this number a lot, like how many years will you live? But I want you to understand that there's actually two different types of life expectancies. So we have our total life expectancy. That's just the number of years to live, right? That's the quantity of your life. But you also have something called a healthy life expectancy. So healthy life expectancy is a number of years that you live with full health, without chronic pain, without disability, without illness. So that's a number we really want to focus on. Like, how many years are we going to live well? So look at those two charts at the bottom. For men, average life expectancy, about 76 years. For women, it's 81. Healthy life expectancy, however, for men is 65, and for women it's 67. So people on average are living between 11 and 14 years impaired in some way. Okay? Think about that number of 65, 67. What do you all want to do around that time? That's retirement age, right? So you want to take the time to travel and play with your grandchildren and take all this money you've saved up and do the fun things. Here's the problem. The average American gets to that age, and all that money they've saved up, now they're spending on healthcare because they haven't taken care of themselves in their younger years in order to set them up for a good, healthy life expectancy. So when we think about our behaviors, when we think about our actions now, late teens, early 20s, college age, we want to think about, how am I setting myself up for a long, healthy life expectancy? Okay, so here we're talking about quantity versus quality, basically. So the good news is that Americans are living longer than ever, thanks to modern medicine, things like vaccinations. But let's talk about what we are actually dying from in this country. So number one cause of death, many of you are probably familiar with this, is heart disease. Number two is cancer. Now these numbers come from the CDC in 2018, our last update. About half of all deaths are from number one and number two. It's about 43%, actually. Here's the good news. We're actually seeing the number of cancer deaths go down because of a lot of the technology and medical advancements, so that's really good news. We have number three, unintentional injury. Number four, chronic lower respiratory disease. Number five is stroke. And you can see 6 through 10 there. So the point I want to make here is that all of these top five, all of them, are in some way preventable by our behaviors. Now, you might think like, okay, number three, unintentional injury, how does that relate to behavior? So the first thing that comes to your mind is probably something like car accident, right? That could be because of risky behavior like speeding while driving or driving while intoxicated or texting while driving. So certainly there's some risky behavior, right? Here's the interesting thing. Car accidents are not actually the leading cause of unintentional death in adults. Some of you might know what it is, and I would certainly ask for your input if we were in class, but what has surpassed car accidents are actually drug-induced deaths. This is an outdated graph. This is 2013, and our numbers just continue to grow. In 2018, there was over 70,000 drug-induced deaths. So it has far surpassed motor vehicle accidents as our leading cause of unintentional death. This is something we will get to in a few weeks. So we'll get to a section on substance use and addiction. So we'll certainly hone in on this, but have this on your radar. This is a major thing that's affecting our country right now. This is a major kind of health challenge that we are facing. So thinking about the world. So I want you to take a second and think, do you think that the leading causes of death in the world are the same or they are different than in the US? So when we look globally at causes of death, you might be surprised, but again, this is from 2018. The number one cause is actually the same, heart disease. Okay, so heart disease is the number one cause of death in the US. It's also in the world. Then we have stroke, we have COPD, we have lower respiratory infection, Alzheimer's disease. Think about 3 and 4. Okay, these are related to the lungs, okay, respiratory issues. What do you think is causing that? Take a second and brainstorm. What do you think is causing 3 and 4? If you thought about smoking, you are correct. Okay, so tobacco smoking in the US, the prevalence is actually going down. That's great news. That's not what we see in the rest of the world. We're actually seeing the smoking rates go up, so we're seeing more of these respiratory infections. So here's the big picture. If we look at the causes of death in 1900, and then we fast forward and look at currently what the causes of death are, it's very, very different, right? So in 1900, more than half the deaths were because of infectious disease. Things that were communicable diseases, things you caught very quickly, and they also killed you very quickly, right? Now we don't see a whole lot of that because we have modern medicine, we have vaccinations. So now we actually see more death from things we call chronic disease. So chronic disease are health conditions that take decades and decades and decades sometimes to onset. They're not communicable diseases, right? So they're things like heart disease and cancer and diabetes and things that have a lot of different underlying causes. Here's the thing about chronic disease. It's multifactorial. It includes a lot of behavioral risk factors. What's the good news about that? That's good news because it's also to some degree preventable. Right? So we have a lot of control over our behaviors, so we can prevent some chronic disease by what we choose to do. Okay, so that's the good news about chronic disease. So making this a little more relevant to your age group, 15 to 24, the leading cause of death here is, of course, unintentional injuries. Then we have things like suicide, homicide, 4 and 5, cancer and cardiovascular disease. In your age group, this is not going to be because of a lifestyle decision. This is probably going to be something congenital, right? So this isn't because of lifestyle. 1, 2, and 3, however, what do we see involved with that? Typically, we see substance use, mental health issues. So those are things we're going to certainly talk about in this class and kind of hone in on because they're so relevant to your age group. One other thing I want to make, another point I want to make is that our behaviors certainly don't just affect us. Right? Sometimes that's our mentality, like my behaviors just affect me, they don't affect anybody else, when in actuality, our behaviors have a big influence over other people. Okay? So we don't live our life in this bubble. We don't walk around in a bubble and our behaviors don't affect other people. So let's just, give an example. Let's say that I were to go to the cancer doctor today and get a cancer diagnosis, right? So who does that affect? Does that just affect me? Of course not. That affects my children. That affects my husband. That affects, lots and lots of different people. So it has far-reaching effects. And I want us to think about our behaviors in that way. In this class, we're going to talk a little bit on a bigger scale about how kind of the behaviors of our country are affecting the health of our country in a little bit. Maybe things like financial health. This is just one number, one example, but we spend about $190 billion a year on obesity. Okay, something that is partially preventable because of our behaviors. We're spending a lot of money on it. So think about how your behaviors not only affect you, but how do they affect lots and lots of people around you.